Hey everyone, this week we're talking about colour theory and how it applies to photography. Colour can be really important in photography. It can affect the composition and visual impact of an image, but also the mood and the viewer's emotional connection to it. In my day job I work as a graphic designer, so I know a little bit about colour theory, but today I want to talk specifically about how it applies to photography. And I'm referencing a lot of what I'm talking about today from this book, which is The Art of Photography by Bruce Barnbaum. And this is a really good book, I recommend reading all of it, but the stuff on colour theory is in chapter 6. And I'm talking specifically about digital photography today, but the book does cover film photography as well, so if you're interested in that, it's another reason to check it out. So I think that's enough of an intro, let's get started. So this is a typical colour wheel that you may or may not be familiar with. It's made up of the primary colours, red, yellow and blue. There are other colour wheels that are made up of light, so that would be red, green and blue, but most people are more familiar with pigments and how those are mixed in real life to create the secondary colours. So we're not going to talk about RGB and light, we're mainly going to refer to this colour wheel with the primary colours, like I said, red, yellow and blue. And then in between each of those colours you see the secondary colours, which are made by a mixture of a varying amount of the two colours either side. So orange, for example, is made of a mix of yellow and red, and depending on how much of the red or yellow you have, it'll be a slightly different hue of that orange colour. Colours can be grouped into families, so they will be located around one of the colours on the wheel, or you can look at the opposites. So we've got red opposite green, orange is opposite blue, and they're the contrasting opposite colours of each other. So taking this a step further, we've got the colour sphere. So this is, you can think of it like the Earth or a planet. You've got the equator, and around the equator we've got our colour wheel that we saw before. So we can see here we haven't got all the colours, but we've got the primary ones, blue, red and yellow. The secondary ones will be on there as well, but for simplification of this diagram we've just got the three primaries. And then at the North and South Pole we've got the tonal ranges. So at the North Pole we've got pure white, and at the South Pole we've got pure black. And then our colours, if we move them longitudinally up and down the lines that go around our globe, they will become lighter as they get towards the North Pole where it's white, or they will become darker as they move towards the South Pole where it's black. And we can also see how the saturation of the colour changes. So as we move from the surface of the sphere inwards towards the centre, on that central axis point, we see how the colour becomes less saturated. So as it moves towards the centre it becomes more grey until it becomes full grey in the centre. Just like with the colour wheel, we can have groups of families of colours or opposites of colours. However, it's a little bit more complex on the sphere because we've also got that tonal difference or the saturation or lightness and darkness, so the opposites can be anywhere on the surface of that sphere rather than just on the circumference of the wheel. So the colour wheel and colour sphere tell us about the hue, saturation and tone of the colours in our image. Here we've got red and green, which are completely different hues, and you can see there's a strong contrast visually between those two colours. If we reduce the saturation, we see that the more we reduce that, the less contrast there is between those two colours. And that's because tonally, red and green are quite similar. So as we get all the way down to desaturated, which is effectively monochrome, black and white, we see there's no difference whatsoever. So a strong difference in hue, but very little difference in tone. Next we can look at this dark red colour and this light blue colour. Here we've got strong tonal differences and hue differences. So there's a strong hue difference between the red and the blue, but also when we desaturate we've got a strong tonal difference and we can see a sharp contrast between the two there. Finally we've got this dark blue colour and a light blue colour, and the hue of these two colours is the same. We can see that if I bring down the brightness of that light blue, it will eventually match the colour on the left. So you can see there the hue is exactly the same, we just separated by tone, and if we bring the saturation down, that becomes even more apparent. So we can see how this works with some images. If we take this one of the butterfly, this is against a green background with some strong red colours on the wings of the butterfly, and they're colour opposites. We've got the red opposite the green, and it really jumps out against that green. However, if we look at the monochrome version, we see we've got the tonal difference, so the blacks of the wings of the butterfly and the butterfly's body, that stands out against the background because of the tonal variation, but we no longer have the colour contrast because the tone is very similar between the green and the red when it's in a converted black and white format. If we look at this one, we've got a lot of blue tones, so not much variation in the hue, but we do have tonal variations. If we look at the black and white version, we see we've got a lot of difference between the horizon and the sky, and the sail of the boat still stands out against the background. Even though it's very similar in hue, the tone is different and stands out from the background. And just like how we use tone in our images to create the compositional elements, so the lines and patterns and forms, and how those relationships create balance and movement, similarly we can also use colour. So in this image captured at Zescher Zollverein in Germany, we've got the really strong leading line created by the orange of this escalator. The rest of the image is fairly monochrome, and that just jumps out of the image, and because you've got this strong triangular shape converging into the centre of the image, it really pulls you in. But if you look at the monochrome version of this image, you'll see there's no tonal variation. The oranges that were there before just blend in with the same tones as the rest of the image, and we've lost that leading line. So colour does play a really important factor in the composition of your images in just the same way that tone does. But don't forget, this can also have the opposite effect, so you might have an area of your image, for example, you might have a really prominent bright blue area in one corner of the image, and that's really drawing the eye towards it, and that can really unbalance your image and your composition. In this example, I obviously just want to focus on the man sat down in the centre of the image. We have two distracting areas, one in the top left, which is this really bright yellow colour, and also down here in the bottom right we have this quite bright blue area. And both of those pull your eye away from the centre into the corners of the image and don't really add anything to the overall image. So I've reduced the saturation of the blue in the bottom right, I've taken that down to 0 effectively, and that just gives it a grey which blends in with the rest of the image. And I've removed the yellow poster in the background completely. That was just too much of a distraction. I could have tried changing the hue or the saturation, but really that had a lot of tonal distractions in it as well with the blacks, so I've just completely got rid of that. So we also need to think about how colour affects the mood of an image and our emotional response to it. Thousands of years of evolution have taught humans to associate particular colours with certain things. Sunlight and fire are associated with reds and oranges, whereas cooler colours such as blues are more associated with ice and water and cold things like that. So those colours will bring out those emotions and feelings in your image. If we look at this one at Winnott's Pass at sunrise, it's obviously a very warm image, we can feel that sunlight coming through. You do get very different temperatures at different times of the day, so golden hour time at sunrise and sunset, you're going to get much warmer, richer, more fiery tones, whereas midday light, even on a sunny day, will have a slightly more cooler feel to it. And these colours will bring out an emotional response in people. You might also want to have warm tones in a portrait shot, for example, which will bring out the character of a person if they've got a warm personality. Or, like in this example, we might want to bring out the cooler tones. So this is obviously a shot in winter, you've got the visual representations there of the snow and the branches and things, but this wouldn't have half as much effect if it was in oranges and reds as it does with these blue tones. It really brings out the icy coolness of it. And cool colours like this can have connections with feelings of isolation, loneliness, sometimes sadness, but also quietness and calmness and contemplation and things like that. Saturation and tone will also have an emotional effect in your image. So depending on how dark or light or how saturated those tones are, it will give a different vibe or mood to your image. This is quite a colourful shot. It was captured down in Devon in the UK, and there's a lot of colour in this image, but the tones and hues are quite pastel. So we get a fairly soft and calm image. If we compare that to something like this shot, this was captured in midday light. It's fairly cool light, but the colours are fairly saturated as well, so there's a lot of impact here. There's a lot of tonal contrast, and it really pops, and everything is sharp and in detail. And there's no right or wrong. You just have to be aware of these effects in your image and what you want to convey. So finally, we'll quickly look at some of the ways that we can use a raw image editor to adjust some of the colour properties in an image. I'm using Lightroom for this, but you can use your editor of choice. And like I said earlier, this is just digital. We're not going to talk about film in this video. This is using digital processing, and I would recommend using 16-bit RAW files to do this. You can use JPEGs, but you can have much more control using a RAW file because you can change all of the parameters and colours after you've shot the image, and you've got much more control than you do with a JPEG. So one of the benefits of RAW is that you can adjust your white balance after you've taken the shot. You can set the white balance in camera if you want, and that can help to visualise your scene, but even if you've set your white balance at the time, you can still change it later in your editor. I usually just set it to auto, and then when I get into Lightroom, I can bring that to the right to give a warmer tone to the image, or to the left to bring in those cool tones. And below that we've got the tint slider, which will help to counterbalance what you've done with your temperature slider. So I can bring that to the left, that'll bring more green tones into the image, and if I bring it to the right, it'll bring more purple tones in there. So just a little bit further down the tone palette, we've got the vibrance and saturation sliders. So these tend to do similar things, however, saturation will affect the overall saturation of the colour in the image. So bringing it up to the right will really introduce saturated tones. Bring it to the left will start to make the image more muted until you get down to desaturated, which is effectively black and white. The vibrancy slider will affect the saturation of colours within the image. However, it works on a different kind of scale to saturation. It will preserve some colours within the image whilst emphasising others. It's mainly used for things like portraits, where you want to adjust the vibrancy or saturation of the image, but you don't want to make the skin tones too oversaturated, for example. And you'll see here, if I pump that up, it's just affecting the blues there in the background, but preserving some of the other saturated tones within the image. Moving on now, we've got the HSL colour palette. So this is where we can really affect the hue, saturation and luminance of all the colours within our image. So you see, for every colour we've got a slider, and under hue, this will affect what colour each colour is, if that makes sense. So if I change the blue slider, for example, you see the background there becomes more cyan. If I bring it to the left, bring it to the right, we'll start to make it more purple. And we can do that with each colour within our image. So the greens, I can make them more yellow, or much more green, almost with a blue tinge, bringing it to the right. The saturation will, as you've guessed, bring down the saturation for that particular colour. So if I don't want my greens as green as they are, I can bring that to the left. Same with the yellows, and I start to get a more muted look within the foliage of my image. And because I've done that, it makes all the other colours in the image stand out a little bit more. So now the orange of the path and the blue of the background seems a little bit more prominent because I brought the saturation of that green and yellow down. If I move down to luminance, that'll affect the darkness or lightness of each colour. So if I want a really bright background, I can bring up the luminance slider for blue. You see it's starting to get much brighter now. Or bringing it to the left will make it much darker. So I hope that's been useful. If it has, or you've enjoyed the video in any way, please consider giving me a thumbs up down below. That just really helps out with the channel, gets it spread a bit more widely. That helps me, and it also means that more people can view the video and hopefully they can learn from this too. Thanks for watching. If you're a regular viewer, I really do appreciate it. And if you are new to the channel and you're not yet subscribed and you'd like to do so, you can click down there on the big red button or over here on this picture of me, and that way you'll stay up to date with everything I'm doing each and every week. There's a new video every Sunday morning at 10 AM UK time. So thanks a lot for watching this one. I hope you'll join me for the next one. And until then, thanks a lot everyone, and bye for now.